So first we're going to create a rectangle using the rectangle tool. Click and drag to size. Next we're going to remove the border. So we click on the object, it's the Apply Effect Object button. I'm going to click on Stroke, which is the outside border. I'm just going to change that to 0. You can see it's now sort of disappeared and there's just a blue frame around the outside to show that it's an object. Next thing I'm going to do is fill it with a colour. Again, going to go to the Apply Effect Object button, select Fill, and then go over to the Swatches palette. If these palettes don't show up initially, you might need to change your workspace. So click on Swatches. I'm going to use this sort of purple colour, except I want to make it dark, so if you double click you then get the options. You can pull the sliders like so. Next I want to add some text, so I'm going to go over back to my toolbar, to the type tool, click inside. Selecting the text brings up a context menu where you can change the size of the font, either by arbitrary amounts or by clicking the arrow buttons or using the arrows on the keyboard. This works similarly to a word processor. You can change all sorts of different attributes, such as the text width, the width between letters, and also where they appear on a line. You can also change paragraph options, such as the spacing above, below, and to the left and right. And also, as this font doesn't have an italic style, you can also add a certain amount of lean to each of the characters. To change the colour, again, we'll just click on a swatch. Again, if we want to change the colour, we can double click and change any of the options we want. If you want to add an effect to text, such as a drop shadow perhaps, we'll just click on the frame, again to give the options on our Apply Effects to Object button, and this time we'll select text. With that selected, you can see the icon comes up to replace that button. We can go over to Effects and add drop shadow. Again, if we click the preview button, we can see this happen in real time. Next we're going to add the headline, or should I say some newspaper title, and an image, which is the sort of royal cipher. This time we're going to use the rectangle frame tool, as we're going to use a transparent background. And again, we're just going to click and drag to size. You notice this one doesn't have a border or a colour or anything else. Again, I'm just going to select my type tool. And resize and change the font. So we want this to be quite large. Once that's in, I'm then going to place my image. I go to File, Place, and then I will search the computer for the image that I want. You can use a variety of formats. You can use any format from a Adobe program such as Illustrator or Photoshop. You can also use JPEG, PNG and a wide range of other images. This one is from Illustrator. You can see it's now sort of attached to my mouse tooltip, so I can click and drag to get the size I want, and then I can move it in. Now what I want to do now is get the text to wrap around the image without me having to sort of manually create spacing. To do this, with the image selected, go over to my text wrap palette and click on the wraparound object shape. You can see that the text has now moved to one side. It's good because the text is actually quite a bit too big, so I'm just going to resize the text down a little bit, like so, and I'm going to move my image in. Again, you can see it's now separated the two words. However, I think this image is actually a little bit too big, so I'm going to resize it using the resize tool. You can't just drag the handles, I'll point out. This actually crops the image. You can see it now sort of hiding parts of it rather than resizing it, so we actually need to use the resize tool, which is on the toolbar, or scale tool. There we go. I can now resize this frame to fit. You can use the arrow keys to nudge the image into position a couple of pixels at a time. Now I want to create another text box for the date, so I'm going to draw it underneath the cipher here. Select my text tool to apply it. You can see that the text wrap is actually going to be affecting this image if I make this text box if I make it any bigger. So, for example, if I want to add a stroke to the outside, which is something which I want to do. I also want to make the text a little bit bigger. I'll keep it with sort of Times New Roman bold. To resize. I may want to create sort of a line underneath that, just to use the line tool. So I can add in things like the information about the price and that kind of thing. Again, I can use a rectangle frame tool and just drag this out. When you start to overlay different objects, you'll find it gets increasingly more difficult to select them. So for example, if I wanted this cipher and I accidentally clicked here, I would get the box that's on top of it rather than the cipher itself. Well, this isn't a problem at the moment. As the page becomes more complex, it can be a problem. To remedy this, we can produce several different layers. So all of these ones currently have a blue outline, just like the colour on this layer box. So if we wanted to create a new layer, we could just go to the New Layer button at the top of this palette window. And now when I draw a new text box, you can see it's now bordered in red. To prevent layers being moved around by accident, we can lock layers, and we can also hide them to see where we are in terms of what's going on the page. You can see that the tooltip is now a pencil with a line crossed through it to show that you can't select any of the layers. I'm now going to add another graphic. This time something of a special offer. This time it's a Photoshop file. Like so. This time I'm going to want to sort of rotate this and give it a little bit of an angle. I'm going to use the rotate tool. I'm just going to grab one of the points. You can see this object doesn't have a text wrap, which will be important later. I'm now going to add a large advertising graphic. This time I'm going to use a coloured text box again, so I'm going to use the rectangle tool. I'm going to draw a large box on the page. Just as before, I'm going to get rid of the stroke by clicking on the Apply Effects to Object button, select Stroke, and then remove the point of the border. I'm then going to add a fill using the Swatches palette. I'm going to use this deep blue colour, and then I'm going to add some text. Again, I want to add a colour. This time I'm going to do it in white, perhaps. Change the font type, and then resize. Perhaps not that big. You can see this is quite a large amount of text. However, it's not filling the whole box, so I'm going to use another image. This time I'm going to keep the box selected, because even if this image is going to be absolutely enormous, I don't want it to appear outside of this box. Unlike this other image, which I've attached here, which I want to bring to the front for a start. So first thing, I'm just going to right click on it, select Arrange, and bring that to the front, so it's now overlapping. Unlike this image, which I want to have over the top of several different elements, I want it over the text box that says the mail, I want it over the text box that has the 7 days listing header, and I also want it to go over this blue box, the Mumford & Sons album. If I didn't want that, I just want it to appear just in that box, regardless of its size. I'd click on the box first before placing. This means that when you click inside to add your image, it will only appear in that object. So I'm going to File, Place, have a picture of the album cover here, and you can see it now fills. However, this is absolutely too enormous. as you can see, it fills the entire box. So I'm just going to go and edit, undo. What happens now is that the album cover is attached to your tooltip. So while it's undone the actual place, it now gives the user the option to manually place that image. So again, I'm just going to click and drag inside. But as you can see, it hasn't quite, it now acts as its own independent object rather than something that happens inside the box. What you would need to do is either manually resize that image in another program so it's smaller, or use the resize tool within that object to make it smaller. I'm just going to stick with this object. I can manage, as it's a very uncomplex page at the moment, I can manage this myself. And so I'm going to resize it, and then I'm going to use the rotate tool just to offset it ever so slightly, and again just pull it over and use the arrow keys to nudge it into position. Just as before, I'm going to use the text wrap options. I'm going to use the wrap around object shape, and you can see the text is now wrapping around the outside of the image. You can also see that with the diagonal line, it's actually wrapping to that diagonal. You can change the distance that the wrapping takes place. So if I add 1 or 2 millimeters, you can see it now has an extra box around the outside which shows you the space for wrapping. Now going back to my previous image, the one that wraps here, I want to add a little bit of wrapping just at the bottom. So again, I'm going to go to my wrapping there. You can see that I actually need to, I can't just define the bottom of an image in this particular case. If I use the bounding box, however, I can have a little bit of control, but because I've rotated it and skewed it, this makes it very difficult. And you can see that the male part has gone. So I've got the wrapping that I want on the Mumford & Sons album title, but not on the male. So what I can do, if I select the male, go back to my blue layer and unlock it, go back to my male title, I can right click on the title, click on text frame options, and ask it to ignore a text wrap. Fortunately, this will have a number of different repercussions. As you can see, here is that the text has actually now disappeared entirely underneath the other image. So you have to be very careful about how you place different images and what you do in terms of text wrapping. I'm actually going to remove the text wrap from this image, and I'm probably better off just positioning it. But you can disable text wrap on a number of different elements if you need to. It's particularly good if you want something in an exact place, regardless of whether there's an image or another element there at all. Next thing I want to do is just tidy some of this text up, because you can see it's spanning a couple of lines. So I'm also going to change the alignment. I can increase the size. This time we are going to add the actual headline and some columns of text. Again, I'm going to draw some rectangle frames. These are the unstyled ones, the little X through here. I'm actually going to plot this out a little bit first, so I want my headline to be pretty big, so I'm going to make it around about that size, and then also going to put my columns of text in. If you notice that the page that I've set up already has 4 columns sort of guidelined out, identified, to help me to snap these columns to it, to maintain a sort of equal spacing. You do this when you create a new page. You get options just to add columns. Alternatively, you can add new ones by going up to Layout, Margins and Columns, and clicking on these to make those guidelines. You can also drag guidelines from the ruler at the top. You can drop those anyway, so if I wanted one at the midpoint here, I've then got a guideline in which I can use so later on, and you can also get rid of them if you need to. So I've got these 3 columns now, sorry, 2 columns and a large area for the headline. So I'm going to go ahead and put my headline in. Again, I'm going to change my font to something more appropriate and increase the size. You can see that this text is now overset. The little red icon in the bottom right corner says that the text here is actually too big for this box. So what I'm going to do is just decrease the size ever so slightly. There. I'm also going to add a little bit of spacing from the top. Oh, that doesn't actually work. This is the first paragraph, so I just need to change my base. Just to give it some spacing away from that box, and maybe just add a little bit of space on the left hand side, like so. I can now see what the spacing's actually going to be like, so I'm going to just reduce the size of that box and reduce the size there. I'm going to go to my layers now and just lock that red layer and then create a new layer, because what I'm going to do is just plot my byline for my article. I'm going to put that at the top right here, and what I'm going to do on this box is to add a little bit of text wrap just on the inside and outside, just on the outside, a little bit more at the bottom. So rather than using wraparound object shape, I'm actually using the wraparound bounding box option. Actually, if you notice, this little lock on it changes all of them at the same time. So I'm just going to uncheck that and just have a couple of millimeters at the bottom, and this will be where my byline goes. I've set it up now just so with the length of the article to fit in here, I can sort of add the text and make sure it all fits straight away, rather than then putting an object over the top of it to find that all of the text is kind of moved away. The other thing I'm going to do is create another little box, again on this green layer at the bottom, which will basically be the bit that says go to page 5 or whatever to see the rest of this article, because on the front page you don't really see an entire story. You'll just see the introduction to that story, the sort of main point before you get the detail. I'm actually going to put this in. Read on page 5. Gonna align this to the right, maybe make it bold, like so. And again, I want to add some wrapping to that. Again, this time I want just a little bit of space at the top. So I've now got a portion that I can use for my byline. So for example, this one could be written by Joe Blogg's newspaper correspondent or something like that. And I've got my continue to read on another page box here as well. So I'm going to go and lock my layer and reopen the red layer. I'm now going to add some text, and what I've got here is just some sample text. It's called Lorem Ipsum, which is a sort of in-joke in the publishing world about how to fill out different bits of text. I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to go to my text tool and click on the first box. I'm then going to paste it. Now, obviously there's a lot of text here, and because there's a lot of text, it's obviously not going to fit. So I'm going to go back to my selection tool. Now where this overset text, this little red box that comes in to show that not all of it fits, if I can click on this now, I'll get a tooltip, you can see, and I can just drop this on other text elements, like so, and now it just fills the remainder in that box. Now there's obviously a lot of text. This copied text is obviously not meant to be this story. You'd obviously be much more discerning about what content you put in. However, it is now in. I can just, if I wanted to make more columns, I could. For example, if I wanted to make another column here, make it a 3-column layout instead. Again, I can hit this overset text and drop that in. It turns out I'm just going to undo that, because I don't need that for this article for purposes of this tutorial. I am, however, going to need to change the way in which this looks, so the text is too big. However, what I don't want to do is just to try and, if I've got a lot of text of this particular size across my entire newspaper, so I've got, you know, maybe 100 pages of a newspaper all in this particular typeface and size, the last thing I want to do is select it all. So actually I'm just going to click once, I'm going to go to my paragraph styles, I'm just going to change this basic paragraph. I'm actually going to create one based on it, paragraph style 1, so I'm just using the create a new style. I'm going to right click on that and edit it, and I basically get all the same text options that you get on the context menu. I'm going to change this down to size 8 font, which is obviously quite small. I can change things like the indent on the left, so for example I could have on the first line, I could indent it by a couple of millimeters. You could add things also like drop caps at the front, so for example you could have the first letter in a word at the beginning of a paragraph to be bigger than others, and that kind of thing, but I'm just going to use that one. You can see it's now changed it. So when I click on other paragraphs, I can just click on paragraph styles like so. Now this is actually much too small. Somebody's going to have serious problems trying to read that, so I'm going to just go into edit it, just change it up to size 9, which is a little bit more readable, and you can see it makes the change across all of those tagged styles. And what I'm also going to do, I'm just going to go back to my locked layer where I've added that text wrap. I'm actually just going to remove that text wrap, I think. There we go. And you know, I could edit this down and make sure there's a little space. One thing you might want to make sure you add in a paragraph style is a little bit of space in between the paragraphs, so it's a little bit easier to read. So I'm actually going to get rid of that indent, because I don't really need that, but I am going to add a bit of space between those paragraphs, so you can see there's a little bit of spacing now. There. You'll notice also when you copy text in, there's no formatting, so and occasionally words will go over 2 lines with a hyphen, so you may have to sort of re-edit bits of text as you go along. I'm just going to now go back to my layers. I'm okay, I'm still on the green one, and add in this title. So I can make that quite important, make that look a bit more important, and then just get that on one line. Actually, this text frame is actually a little bit too big, so I'm just going to, again, because the text wrap is on it, of course, it'll do. And now the text actually fits more or less in there. I think there's probably one more sentence that I'd need to edit. I'm also going to add a line. I'm going to go to my line tool. I'm going to give it 2 points, just to outline underneath there. Okay, the next part is to add another of the featured stories. And this time I'm going to use a rectangle tool again. I'm going to remove the border from the beginning and make this stretch down to the bottom end of this page. I'm going to add a fill. Again, going to my Apply Effect Objects button. Go to Swatches and have black text, black background. Sorry. I'm going to add my text in. You can see obviously that this text needs to be made white. Again, I'm just going to change appropriate size. I'm now going to add another image. So we're going to File, Place. This is really just repeating what we've done already, but it will of course help with what we need to do. So you can see this image is actually stuck in that box. Again, if I resized this previously, it would come out the right size and sort of pin to the back. However, I didn't, so I'm going to undo it and just get it on a tooltip. Again, I'm just going to make it around about that big, and then change those text wrapping options and give a little bit of space at the bottom for my text. Again, just nudge it a little bit like so. And then again, I can just fill in more text at the bottom here, just by editing this text box. Add a line break here, and obviously I can add some more text in, for the rest of that story, just as we have before. But here is a very simple newspaper front cover made with rectangle frames based on a grid, using the text options to change the attributes to the text size, using lines and fills, and how to place images with text wrap. Thank you.